Hey guys, Scott here for the Mental Metal channel and mentalmetaldetecting.com. I'm in my garage today doing some testing here, messing around with the machine. I got the Deus 2 in front of me. I have been asked by my Patreon members to do a video on notch indiscrimination, one over the other, and determine, what's the difference. So I'm going to make an attempt at this. I think it's pretty straightforward in my own opinion or my own head, but maybe some of you really aren't sure. So I just want to kind of come in here and do something and kind of show you some of the notching and discrimination features. I'm in just sensitive program right now. There was a notch in there. I want to go back in and set one up just to show you something real quick. Right now I have it off. I'm going to turn it on. I'm going to go up to 23 and 24 by default. By default, that is the oops, 23 and 24. Okay. By default, the tone break for sensitive is 23-24. So if you have that set, by default, it will be set. I had deleted it for some other reason. I was messing around. Come out of that. Now, the one thing I want to point out, maybe some of you aren't aware of this, but how do you know if you do have a notch set in one of your programs? Let's say, for instance, you set up a custom program. You did it months ago. You didn't use it. You decide you want to use it again, or you're not sure what all the settings were. You weren't sure if you made a notch or created a notch or not. The quick, easy way to tell is by looking at your top bar. Your first shaded in bar is going to be your discrimination. Whatever it's 6.8, 6.4, 10, whatever you have it set at for discrimination, it's always going to be this from this beginning bar all the way up till it stops being shaded in. Anything after that that's in a free floating kind of window here, this little indication right here shows you that there's a notch set. If you take that out, obviously that goes away, but that's just a quick indication. If you're looking to know, or if you're trying to figure out if you have a notch set, that is the quick way to look. Of course, you can get a rough idea of the numbers if you know the number scale here, but to find out what those numbers are, obviously you go into menu, go into discrimination, and then scroll down to notch, and then you'll see what is notched out. So that's one thing I wanted to point out to you guys. So for discrimination, for me, like I said, I'm typically at 6.8, 6.4. I don't typically go any higher than 10. I know some people like to crank their discrimination all the way up to 80, and then they cherry pick for silver coins, which is fine. I mean, there's nothing wrong with that. I think that's a pretty cool idea. If you have a little bit limited time somewhere in a park or something, you want to cherry pick. By all means, that's a good way to do it. I don't typically do that. I don't have that need. I have my permissions I can get back to. So I'm trying to make the most when I'm there. So I don't really typically do that. Now, sometimes if I am detecting, and I'm getting a lot of feedback on certain things, I will create a notch, or I will raise the discrimination. The problem with discrimination, unless you're setting up tone breaks, is you can only go up, and you can't set different windows of discrimination. You can, for the most part, when you set up the tone breaks. Right now I'm setting this up to be 6.4, but if you go into expert mode, you'll see what I mean. So in expert mode, if you come down to tones, I have a 3-tone setup here for sensitive. If you go into expert, you're going to see the tone break. So the first one is you're always going to be your discrimination set. So right now I set it at 6.4. Your first tone break is always going to be whatever you have the discrimination set to. So for me, it's 6.4. So your second tone break is going to be all the way up from 6.4 to 72. Now, there's no real discrimination there. You're allowing everything in there. So you can't really change that. You can lower the numbers. So if I go over to 72, or come down to 72, I can change that number to whatever I want, but I'm still allowing all that in. Up here is your discrimination. You're not allowing anything in up to 6.4. Everything else is being allowed in. You're just setting the tone bins for what you want to hear. So we'll leave this at 72 for the default. But you cannot add any discrimination in there. That's the downfall of discrimination. You only have really one option to do it, and that's back here right here in this window. So you can raise and lower that number. You cannot break it up and make it different chunks. You can only do, start at whatever the negative all the way back to, let's see here. We'll just take it all the way back so you know where it starts. So you have a negative 6.4 all the way up. If you discriminate all the way up to 6.4, you're not going to hear anything in between those numbers. So just keep that in mind. So when you go all the way up to, let's say, 80 or whatever it is, 40, there's nothing. You're not going to hear anything coming through the coil from anything from negative 6.4 to 60. It's not. It's going to be blocked. So you're not going to hear it. So let's go back and let's do some notching. I'll show you the difference. I don't want to jack up my program here, so I'm going to make it. I think it actually goes back to default, whatever it was anyway. Rocky's trying to get his ball, but he's not going to get it. So let's go into expert again, and let's go down to our notch. Let's go into expert. So as you can see with notch, we already have one set at 23 and 24, but I have also 3 levels of notch. I can set up 3 different windows of notch, floating windows, which is more convenient than discrimination is. All right, so your notch, you have 3 levels of notch you can do. Right now I have one set at 23 and 24, but let's say I wanted to change that. I wanted to make something, let's say I wanted to knock out the nickel range or something because I don't want to dig nickels. Maybe I'm digging too many nickels. Let's see, I can go down to the second bank for notch, and I can go across and I can set up my tone break. So if I hit this first button, I can go all the way up to, I'm going to go to 60, and then I'm going to go tone break 2, hit this button, and then I'm going to go from 60 to 64, and now realistically I've just now knocked out my nickel range. All right, but let's say I want to do one more notch, and I want to do, let's say I don't want to hear any kind of anything from what my discrimination is. Let's say negative. Let's say 6.4 all the way up to let's say 40. I don't want to dig anything from that to 40. So if I go to the next bank, hit my middle button, just go all the way up. Oop, I'm sorry. Well, you can do it that way too, but let's do it this way. Let's go all the way up to 40. It's just another way you can do it. And then hit your minus button and take everything out from 0 to 40. Now that includes your first 23 and 24, so really you've knocked that notch out already. You really only have 2 notches going on right now because this is kind of voided out, so it's not going to work. So now if you come back to your main screen, now you can see that your first line here, which I told you earlier was your discrimination, is actually not true. It is discrimination from negative 6.4 all the way up to 6.4, but I've added a notch in from 6.4 all the way up to 40, and then I added another notch in it from 60 to 64. So you see the difference here? It might fool you a little bit if you look at it that way, but your discrimination only goes so far. If you add a notch in starting at 6.4, then, or starting at 0, it's going to overlap your discrimination. So I hope that's easy to understand. But just wanted to show you that real quick. What else can I show you? So for me, when do I use notch versus discrimination? Like I said, I typically don't go any higher in discrimination than 10. I will find that if I'm digging things like pull tabs or things that I'm finding in the park that I don't want to dig, I'll get the numbers on those things and try to notch those out and kind of try to avoid those. But honestly, I don't try to use a lot of notch or discrimination on this machine. For me, over time, I think everybody, as you learn how to use this machine, you're going to figure out the more filters you add into this machine, you take away something or you give up something. So, you know, I typically don't like to do too much notching or discrimination for that reason. So for me, this is too much for me. I would never do this, honestly, in a real world situation. So I'm going to back this out to 0. And I'm going to leave the 23-24 in. Probably, realistically, I would probably remove that one too if I was hunting. I don't like doing that. And we'll just take this one out too. So now I don't have anything notched out other than the default 23-24. And that's that. So then we go back to the main screen. And now we only have our discrimination up to 6.4 and our one little notch at 23-24. I'm not sure if this is helpful or not. If I'm hitting the mark with the questions that were being asked about notch versus discrimination, just remember the key difference between the two is if you're running discrimination, you can only set it from a negative 6.4 all the way up to 99, but there's no in between. It's basically a solid bar you're creating of discrimination. If you want that flexibility of being able to notch out things in different windows, let's say you want to knock out the nickel range, or maybe you don't want to hear any dimes, then you can set up a notch by going into the expert mode, and you have 3 different, I call them bays of notch, or 3 different levels of notch that you can set, and you can precisely create your own filtering, notch filtering that way. And that's probably a better way to do it than using discrimination. You have more flexibility, and I think that's the thing to send home with you is you have a lot more flexibility in notch versus discrimination. I don't know the answer to whether or not if discrimination blocks at the coil or notch only blocks at the remote or the WS6 module and just doesn't block the sound from getting to your speaker or headphones. That's an interesting question to ask XP. I don't know that for sure. I know in the original Deus, I believe that was the case, but I'm not sure if that's the way it is now, the Deus 2. Anyway, short video, but just wanted to kind of cover a couple of the basics here with notch and discrimination, as I know it. If I got something wrong, which I probably did in this video, please leave a comment, like, share, and subscribe to this Mental Metal channel, and join me over on Patreon where we have these kind of questions and we turn them into videos. So hope this helps you guys over there on Patreon, and maybe some of you guys on YouTube land somewhere. If it did, just let me know. I'm happy to help wherever I can. Give me some ideas on what videos you want to see next. All right, guys, thanks for watching, and I'll see ya